If you become disabled after April 6, 2026, the government will pay you $51 less every single week, not because your condition is different, but because of the date you got sick. And if you don't act before January 5th, you could lose thousands of pounds forever. Stay with me, because what I'm about to explain could protect your income for years. If you're disabled, chronically ill, or relying on benefits, this channel is for you. I break down changes like this in plain English. No jargon, no government spin, just the truth you actually need to protect yourself. I'm uploading more videos on universal credit, LCWRA, PIP reviews, and upcoming DWP changes very soon. And YouTube doesn't always show them unless you're subscribed. So please hit subscribe now. Not for me, but for you. This channel exists to help people like us stay informed, protected, and one step ahead. The government has passed something called the Universal Credit Act 2025, and this piece of legislation is fundamentally changing how benefits work for people with disabilities and health conditions. The officials at the DWP are calling this a rebalancing of the system, but what that really means in practice is that while some people will see small increases in their basic benefits, many others, particularly those who develop new health conditions or disabilities after April 2026, are going to see their support cut dramatically. And we're not talking about small reductions here. The changes are so substantial that the government itself has admitted that around 50,000 people will be pushed into poverty by 2030 as a direct result of these reforms. Let that sink in for a moment. The government knows these changes will create more poverty, but they're going ahead with them anyway. Here's what's actually changing. Universal credit has different parts to it, and one of the most important parts for people with serious health conditions is called the health element, though it's also sometimes referred to as the LCWRA element, which stands for limited capability for work and work-related activity. Right now, if you're assessed and found to have such severe health problems that you can't work or even prepare for work, you get an extra payment on top of your basic universal credit. This extra payment is currently around £423 per month, or about £105 per week. But from April 6, 2026, if you're a new claimant, meaning you develop a health condition or disability after that date and you apply for this extra support, you're only going to receive £217 per month instead. That's basically half of what people are getting right now. To put it in weekly terms, you'll get £54 per week instead of £105 per week. That's a difference of £51 every single week that you won't have to help manage the extra costs that come with being disabled or seriously ill. Now, you might be wondering why the government is doing this. According to the DWP and the Secretary of State, Liz Kendall, they believe the current system creates what they call perverse incentives. What they mean by this is they think the extra money for people with health conditions is so much more than the basic benefit that it actually encourages people to try to be found unfit for work rather than attempting to get into employment. The government argues that by reducing this health payment and instead increasing the basic standard allowance that everyone gets by a small amount, they'll encourage more people to work. They're planning to increase the basic universal credit standard allowance above inflation for the next 4 years. And by 2029 to 2030, they say a single person aged 25 or over will get about £725 more per year compared to what they would have gotten under the old system. But here's the problem with this argument. That £725 increase over the course of an entire year works out to less than £15 per week, whereas people losing the full health element are losing £51 every single week. So for people with disabilities, this is absolutely not a good deal. They're losing far more than they're gaining. Disability rights campaigners and charities have been vocal in their opposition to these changes. They point out that disabled people genuinely face higher costs of living. We're talking about things like specialist equipment, mobility aids, higher heating bills because of medical conditions, extra transport costs, medications, care and support services, and countless other expenses that non-disabled people simply don't have to worry about. The health element wasn't some luxury. It was meant to help cover these real, documented additional costs. When you reduce this payment by half, you're not encouraging people to work. You're making it harder for them to afford the basics they need just to manage their conditions. Many disabled people want to work and can work with the right support, but the barriers they face include inaccessible workplaces, discrimination from employers, unreliable transport, unpredictable symptoms, and exhaustion from managing their health conditions. Simply cutting their benefits doesn't magically make these barriers disappear. One of the most controversial aspects of these changes is that they create what's being called a two-tier system. If you're already receiving the health element of universal credit before April 6th, 2026, you're protected and you'll continue to receive the higher amount of around £423 per month. But if you develop the exact same health condition just a few weeks later, after the 6th of April, you'll only get £217. This means two people with identical disabilities, identical needs, and identical extra costs could be living on completely different amounts of money, purely based on when they happen to become ill. Debbie Abrahams, who chairs the Work and Pensions Committee in Parliament, has called this discriminatory, and it's hard to argue with that assessment. How can it be fair that your level of support depends not on your needs, but on what date you happen to get sick? There are some exceptions to these cuts, and this is important to understand. If you meet something called the severe conditions criteria, you'll still get the higher rate of the health element, even if you're a new claimant after April 2026. The severe conditions criteria are for people with the most severe and lifelong health conditions or disabilities. Similarly, if you qualify under the special rules for end of life, known as SREL, you'll also be protected and receive the higher payment. People who meet these criteria will also be exempt from routine reassessments, which is at least one small piece of good news because the constant reassessments have been a huge source of stress and anxiety for many disabled people. However, the problem is that the government hasn't been entirely clear about exactly who will qualify under these severe conditions criteria, and this lack of clarity is causing a lot of worry and uncertainty. Let's talk about what you need to do right now if this affects you. Time is absolutely critical here, and this is probably the most important part of this video. If you're currently not claiming universal credit, but you have a health condition or disability that limits your ability to work, you need to act fast. The deadline you need to be aware of is January 5th, 2026. Why this specific date? Because there's something called a 3-month waiting period before the health element can be added to your universal credit claim. This means that if you want to make sure you get assessed and receive the higher rate of the health element before it gets cut in April, you need to have your claim in place and your assessment completed before that April 6th deadline. Working backwards 3 months from April 6th brings you to early January. If you submit your claim for universal credit and provide all the relevant medical evidence by January 5th, 2026, your assessment should be completed and the higher LCWRA amount should be included in your universal credit award before the cutoff date. If you wait and submit your claim after this date, you'll likely end up getting the new, lower rate instead. For people who are already on universal credit but haven't yet been assessed for the health element, the situation is a bit more complicated. You need to report your change in health circumstances to the DWP and request a work capability assessment as soon as possible. The exact deadline for when you need to do this depends on something called your monthly assessment period, which is different for each claimant. Essentially, you need to figure out when your assessment period that includes April 5th ends, and then count back 3 months from there. That's your personal deadline for requesting the assessment. This is complex, and if you're in this situation, it's really worth getting advice from a welfare rights advisor or a benefits advice organization like Citizens Advice or a local disability charity. They can help you work out your specific deadline and make sure you don't miss it. There's another group of people who also need to pay attention. If you're already on universal credit and you've already been through a work capability assessment, but you were only found to have limited capability for work, rather than limited capability for work and work-related activity, and your condition has since gotten worse, you can ask the DWP to review your award. If you do this, and you're then found to have limited capability for work-related activity, the good news is you won't need to wait through the 3-month waiting period again. the LCWRA amount can be added to your claim from the first day of the assessment period in which you requested the review. But again, you need to make sure this review happens before April 6, 2026, or you'll end up with the lower rate. Now let's talk about personal independence payment, or PIP, because there are changes happening there too, although the situation is slightly different. The government had originally planned to tighten the eligibility criteria for PIP starting in 2026. Specifically, they wanted to change the rules so that people would need to score at least 4 points from a single activity to qualify for the daily living component, in addition to the existing requirement of scoring at least 8 points overall. This would have meant that people who scored points across multiple different activities but didn't score high enough on any single activity would lose their PIP. However, after significant backlash from MPs, disability campaigners, and the public, the government has temporarily shelved these specific changes. In July 2025, ministers made a last-minute concession to help win a crucial vote on their welfare reform bill, promising to strip out the PIP changes and conduct a review first. This review is being led by Sir Stephen Timms, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, and it's examining whether the current PIP assessment criteria accurately reflect the extra costs that disabled people face in the modern world. However, and this is crucial, just because the government paused one specific change to PIP doesn't mean they've abandoned the idea of cutting disability benefits overall. The review is expected to conclude in autumn 2026, and depending on what it recommends, we could still see significant changes to PIP eligibility in the future. The government has made it clear that they believe the PIP system needs reform because the number of people claiming it and the costs associated with it keep rising. Ministers have talked about PIP expenditure being unsustainable in the long term. So while there's been a temporary reprieve, disabled people claiming PIP shouldn't become complacent. It's important to stay informed about what the review recommends and to respond to any consultations that come out as a result. Beyond the cuts to the health element of universal credit and the uncertainty around PIP, there are other changes happening across the welfare system. The government has announced that the two-child benefit cap is being abolished from April 2026. This cap, which has been incredibly controversial, prevented families from claiming universal credit or child tax credit for a third or subsequent child born after April 2017. Its removal is genuinely good news and will help hundreds of thousands of children who have been trapped in poverty because of this policy. Additionally, the government is increasing the maximum amount of childcare costs that can be claimed through universal credit for families with 3 or more children. This is meant to make it easier for parents to afford childcare and therefore get back into work. The work capability assessment itself, which is the test used to determine whether someone has limited capability for work, is also changing for new claimants. From 2025 onwards, new people applying for employment and support allowance or universal credit have been subject to revised work capability assessment criteria. The DWP consulted on making the assessment stricter, and despite the majority of consultation responses opposing the changes, they've gone ahead with implementing some of them anyway. This includes changes to how substantial risk is assessed. Previously, if there was a substantial risk that work or work-related activity would be harmful to your health or someone else's, you could be placed in the support group and receive the LCWRA element. The new rules are tightening this, so that substantial risk will only apply in exceptional circumstances and for specific physical and mental health conditions that the DWP specifies. This is deeply concerning because it means people who are at genuine risk of harm from being pushed into work-related activity might not be protected anymore. There are also changes to reassessment policies. While people with the most severe lifelong conditions will be exempt from routine reassessments, which is positive, everyone else is likely to face more frequent and more intensive assessments. This is going to create additional stress and anxiety for disabled people who already find the assessment process traumatic. Studies and personal testimonies have repeatedly shown that the fear of losing benefits through reassessment can be as harmful to people's mental health as actually losing the benefits themselves. The government says these reassessments are necessary to ensure people are getting the right level of support and to catch any improvements in people's conditions. But critics argue that for many people with fluctuating or degenerative conditions, the reassessment process is pointless and cruel. In terms of conditionality, which means the requirements you have to meet to keep receiving benefits, there are indications that the government plans to get stricter. While people found to have limited capability for work-related activity are theoretically exempt from having to look for work or attend job interviews, the government is exploring new forms of conditionality even for this group. This could include requirements to attend health-related appointments, engage with employment support services, or participate in training programs. The details haven't been fully spelled out yet, and the DWP says it will share more information in due course, but this is something to watch closely. The concern is that even if these requirements seem reasonable on paper, in practice, they could be applied inflexibly, and people could face sanctions, meaning their benefits get reduced or stopped for failing to comply even when they have legitimate reasons. So what should you be doing right now to prepare for all these changes? First and foremost, if you're potentially eligible for the health element of universal credit and you're not currently claiming it, get your claim in before January 5th, 2026. Don't delay. Gather your medical evidence, including fit notes from your doctor, any hospital letters, reports from specialists, and anything else that documents your health condition and how it affects you. Make your claim and make sure the DWP knows you have a health condition that limits your ability to work. Second, if you're already on universal credit and you think your condition has worsened or you haven't been assessed for the health element yet, request a work capability assessment immediately. Don't wait. Again, make sure you have all your medical evidence ready. Third, keep detailed records of everything. Save copies of all correspondence with the DWP, note down the dates and times of phone calls, keep records of any appointments you attend, and document your symptoms and how your condition affects your daily life. This evidence could be crucial if you need to challenge a decision or request a reassessment. Fourth, seek advice and support. There are lots of organizations out there that can help you navigate the benefits system. Citizens Advice, Disability Rights UK, Scope, Mind, and many local disability charities offer free confidential advice. They can help you understand your rights, complete claim forms, prepare for assessments, and challenge decisions if things go wrong. Don't try to manage this alone if you're struggling. Fifth, if you're currently receiving the health element of universal credit, make sure the DWP has all your up-to-date information. If your circumstances change in any way, report it promptly, but also be aware that changes to your circumstances could potentially trigger a reassessment. This is a difficult balance because you're legally required to report changes, but you also don't want to inadvertently trigger a process that could result in you losing support. If you're unsure, get advice before you report anything. Looking at the bigger picture, these changes are part of what the government says is a strategy to get Britain working. They argue that too many people have become dependent on benefits when they could be working with the right support, and that the welfare system needs to be reformed to encourage employment rather than dependency. Ministers point to statistics showing that nearly 2.8 million people are out of work due to long-term sickness, and that spending on health and disability benefits is projected to rise by an additional £18 billion. They say this is unsustainable and that urgent reform is necessary. However, disability rights organizations and many economists dispute this framing. They argue that the reason so many people are out of work due to ill health isn't because benefits are too generous, it's because of a failure to provide adequate health care, employment support, and workplace adjustments. They point out that the NHS is struggling with massive waiting lists, that mental health services are severely underfunded, that many employers are reluctant to make reasonable adjustments for disabled workers, and that accessible jobs are often low-paid and insecure. Simply cutting benefits doesn't address any of these underlying problems. There's also a real question about whether these reforms will actually save money in the long run. The government expects to save billions from reducing disability benefits, with estimates suggesting savings of up to £7 billion per year. But what happens to the people who lose this support? Many will turn to local authority social services for help, which are already severely stretched. Some will end up needing more NHS care because their health deteriorates due to stress and poverty. Others may end up homeless or in crisis, which creates costs elsewhere in the system. Multiple analyses have suggested that the real savings from these reforms might be much smaller than the government claims once you account for these knock-on effects. There's also the human cost, which can't be measured in pounds and pence. We're talking about real people whose lives are going to be made significantly harder, who are going to struggle to afford food, heating, and medication, who are going to live in constant anxiety about money, and who are being told that their needs don't matter as much as balancing the budget. It's worth remembering that disabled people are among the most disadvantaged groups in society. They already face higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and social isolation compared to non-disabled people. They already experience discrimination and barriers in almost every area of life. These benefit cuts are happening at the same time as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, with food prices, energy bills, and housing costs all remaining stubbornly high. For someone trying to manage a serious health condition on benefits that are about to be slashed, the situation is genuinely frightening. This is why campaigners are urging everyone who cares about disability rights and social justice to make their voices heard. Write to your MP, respond to government consultations when they're published, support disability charities and campaign groups, and share information about these changes with anyone you think might be affected. The more pressure the government faces, the more likely they are to reconsider the most harmful aspects of these reforms. In conclusion, the DWP benefit cuts that have been approved are real, they're significant, and they're happening very soon. From April 6, 2026, new claimants with health conditions will receive roughly half the support that current claimants get. This is going to push thousands of disabled people into poverty, create a discriminatory two-tier system, and cause immense hardship for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. If you think you might be affected, you need to act now. Get your claim in before the January deadline if you're not already claiming. Gather all your medical evidence, seek advice and support, and make sure you understand your rights. These are challenging times, but knowledge is power, and by staying informed and taking action, you can protect yourself as much as possible. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please give it a like, share it with anyone who might need this information, and subscribe to the channel for more updates on benefits and welfare changes. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you're not alone in facing these challenges. If you become disabled after April 6, 2026, the government will pay you $51 less every single week, not because your condition is different, but because of the date you got sick. And if you don't act before January 5th, you could lose thousands of pounds forever. Stay with me, because what I'm about to explain could protect your income for years. If you're disabled, chronically ill, or relying on benefits, this channel is for you. I break down changes like this in plain English. No jargon, no government spin, just the truth you actually need to protect yourself. I'm uploading more videos on universal credit, LCWRA, PIP reviews, and upcoming DWP changes very soon. And YouTube doesn't always show them unless you're subscribed. So please hit subscribe now, not for me, but for you. This channel exists to help people like us stay informed, protected, and one step ahead.